Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to this live stream. I'm not going to be here very long, but just want to take a moment to celebrate the winners at the Oscars, especially because I'm ecstatic that no other land took home an Oscar. I wrote about this movie a few days ago, put it up over the weekend. I saw the film in February at the Music Box Theater in Chicago, and it was such an experience. A documentary feature in the auditorium. There were 300 people. How many times do you go to a documentary film screening and there are that many people there with you? And how many times do you get to see a documentary feature in a movie theater these days? And awards uh, this awards event for movies was remarkable. I'd say the two big takeaways was that it was a huge evening for independent film. It was not a great night for the major media conglomerates and their studios. Their movies were outperformed by smaller films, and I think that says a lot about the state of the business. I'll just pause for a moment and say, often on this channel, people who come to hear me speak, I'm talking about other things like freedom of the press, like government transparency, secrecy, like whistleblowers. Well, I'm a big film fan, and this is my YouTube channel, and I have people here who engage with me and sometimes like to show up and enjoy a little bit of discussion of movies. And there's a bit of intersection tonight because no other land winning an Oscar, and then I'm still here winning the Oscar for Best International Feature Film. And I'd also like to say Flow winning for the animated film, and that being such a small film that overtook Wild Robot, which has the support of major media company. While this is a smaller film that Janus Films picked up, which has a cooperating kind of a relationship, a link with Criterion, and that's the first award won an Oscar, the first time that Latvia has won an award. And I wish I could say the director's name off the top of my head, but he's been able to get exposure for winning, and that movie actually has a lot in common with Wild Robot, but the movie Flow, just these films that were nominated, just showing that people are hungry for stories that are not just part of these stale franchises, that are not just derivative, that are not remakes or reboots. That what we were seeing, the substance being in the top 10, the 10 of the best pictures that were nominated for the award, says a lot. Like, people are ready for a different kind of range of movies to finally receive acknowledgement and accolades from people who hold themselves out as the arbiters of what is good in the industry. And so I want to just point out that the most nominations was Amelia Perez, and Amelia Perez is a Netflix, but didn't do very well at all. Brutalist, A24, so not really a major company, but they didn't. They were the second most nominated film, Brutalists team, and didn't walk away with as many awards as expected. Had actually, both of those films in the last month and a half seemed to lose their support, and were overtaken by Anora, a complete unknown, which is Fox Searchlight owned by Disney. Uh, didn't win a single award. And so that just shows you again that these major media companies struggled at this Oscars. Wicked, Universal Pictures, NBC Universal, owned by Comcast. It did pick up some awards, several good technical awards went to Wicked, but they didn't come away with the Best Picture, and they probably weren't going to, especially when, again, it's mostly a derivative kind of a work, although it is much more epic treatment of the Broadway musical. Honora, though, 5 out of 6 awards, 5 out of 6 awards, and they won. And that's Neon, and it's a smaller distributor, and it's an independent film. And Sean Baker comes from the world of independent filmmaking, and I've always appreciated his work ever since I saw Tangerine. I think that's probably where most people first were introduced to him. Florida Project made my top 10 list years ago when that was released, and following what he's done. And it was good to see that as he took the stage, he didn't only talk about this work that he's done, but he spoke about what he had learned from being able to hear the stories from sex workers, and so to speak about them and say that in his movies, which are really, I think, attempts to humanize those people and no longer just degrade them as society tends to do. And Tangerine had two trans characters in the film. So in a time when these types of people are under attack, we're living in a country where those kinds of people are under attack. To see this film elevated, of course, perhaps what resonated with people when it comes to Honora is that the screwball comedy of it, and fighting against this uh, group of henchmen that are sent over by a Russian oligarch to retrieve this kind of deadbeat son, this Nepo baby who is out of control. And there's probably a bit of like anti-Russian fervor that fueled the success of this film. Uh, but obviously, uh, I don't think that takes anything away from what Sean Baker was able to achieve with his film. I don't think it leans into that gratuitously. And fine. It's a good premise for a story that these oligarchs fly around, their kids fly around the world. They come to these locales. They seek to take advantage of people. They don't have any intentions of really forming serious relationships. And then this is what happens in the aftermath. So I do want to get to the two films that I like most seriously want to speak a little bit about, which was I'm Still Here and No Other Land. I'll begin with I'm Still Here because I saw this a couple of weeks ago, and it it really, I think, one of the reasons why this movie speaks to me is because when you think of the moment we live in, with Donald Trump as president, and the various people in his administration, and what they are doing, I don't know that they'll be able to achieve this. But when you look at the military dictatorship that's depicted in Brazil in this film, and I'm Still Here, and you see what happens. The people who come to the home of Fernanda Torres, her character, um, she's uh, Eunice Paiva. She's a mother and an activist. And when they come to her home and they take her husband, Rubens Paiva, who's a former politician, a dissident politician, you see the extent to which the military police goes in order to make this seem normal, in order to not attract attention to people. And then when they take her away and she's effectively tortured, kept in solitary confinement for a length of time, and her husband's disappeared. This is a true story. Uh, Once that is over, they deny that anything happened, and they create this narrative to make it seem like uh, they're not engaged in something that is unjust. And so the way in which you're expected to return to your life and be normal, and the way in which Eunice Paiva is basically put in this position that if she challenges this dictatorship, she's going to be the one who's causing trouble. She has to go to so much effort to prove that this injustice was even committed against her. Just seeing that play out, like that shows you how far fascism could get, how far totalitarianism could get. And I think, that's the most sinister aspect of that's the evil that I felt the most in this movie. While I felt it so powerful, is that what was dark was that the way they made everything seem normal for people in the population, the way people continued their lives, the way people coped and just found a way to keep going while people are being forcibly disappeared, and there's mass killing happening. That is not any kind of a future you would want here. And I don't know at this point that the people running the United States have the ability to maintain a regime so tightly controlled and so able to carry out these kinds of acts without and to suppress any kind of uprising and any groups of people that are rebelling to disrupt. But we do have a administration that is opposed to almost the full range of activists that exist, and there's not much of a social movement. So this movie really got me thinking about the present in the United States, and any parallels, uh, but in a very small sense, seeing Fernanda Torres do this very powerful performance, seeing um, you know what she was able to bring to this role really hit home to me. Uh, just the quiet brutality of it all, because what we're seeing is in this movie is the emotional impact of dictatorship on a human being, and the different subtleties. We're not just like seeing bloodshed, but we're seeing the psychological torment that can be so easily inflicted, and that can be harder to speak to people about. That can be harder to present and show, because you're not necessarily able to point to scars. But I mean, her husband was disappeared, and she had to find a way to prove over time, and get them to admit that this was done to her by her own government, just like so many other people who lived through this time. So I'm glad to see that this movie was recognized at the Oscars. Now let's go to the uh, No Other Land documentary. This is a movie about the illegal settlements in Masa Feriata. It was made by a collective of filmmakers. The two that have been out the most promoting the movie are an Israeli journalist named Yuval Abraham, and then Basil Adra, a Palestinian journalist. Basil lives in a village called Atubani, and then Yuval lives in Jerusalem. And as you can tell from this acceptance speech, Yuval is able to leave. He has freedom of movement. And that's something that Basil Adra does not have. I would say that I think it is remarkable that Basil was able to travel. And then there's also co-directors, and Hamdan Bilal is another. I believe he's Palestinian, and then you have Rachel Zor, who worked on the film as well. And I suppose any of these filmmakers I just named, and they're first-time filmmakers, the fact that they were allowed to travel and attend the Oscars, it says a lot, because Uh, it could easily easily have been the case that they were denied visas or that they had trouble getting into the US for this ceremony, but they were able to attend and they showed up. There was an image that is out there. If I can find it, I'll put it up of them standing with their keffiyehs. Actually, just let me take a moment to pull this up here so that I can show you what they look like over at Dropsite News. I know that they grabbed an image of them attending the Oscars. It's a very powerful moment for these group of people because if you followed the race for best documentary feature, if you can believe that there's a race among them, there was a film from Ukraine called Porcelain War. I don't know too much about it. It's actually the one film of the nominees that I didn't get a chance to see at all. And I don't think it's really had distribution. I think it might actually have worse distribution than No Other Land, which is somewhat ironic because most of the press that No Other Land received was about it lacking distribution due to a kind of industry wide suppression effort that discouraged companies from accepting any deal. Like basically, they couldn't get a agreement so that major theater chains screened the film ahead of the Oscars, but which is odd because typically any movie that receives a nomination, at least between January 1st and February 28th, you're able to get at least a week or 2 weeks on screens. It's actually typically a time in the movie business where you're dumping your most awful films. You're getting them off your plate. You don't have to worry about them going forward the rest of the year. You put your weakest films forward. Some companies will try to put out a little bit of diamonds in the rough here and there, but it's kind of like this is a time where those nominees for the Oscars get a chance to fill up the screens. And so it was spoken about that if you looked at the predictions for the race, there were a number of people who are pundits for the movie industry and or critics, if you want to call them that, and they were saying Ukraine is safe. Ukraine as a subject matter is much safer than the West Bank or a movie that is about Palestine and Israel. And obviously, I wouldn't disagree with that. But this sort of cynical attitude fed into this belief, I think, that No Other Land didn't have a chance to win with the Academy because those people are primarily supporters of Ukraine, and you haven't seen as much open support for Palestinians in Gaza as they've survived bombardment, and also you don't hear much from Hollywood about the illegal settlements in the West Bank. So how could that movie do better? How could it perform better than this movie about Ukraine? You may not know, but last year, 20 Days in Mariupol was the winner in the documentary category. So if Porcelain War won, then it would have meant that back to back, both years would have been about the Ukrainian war. And I don't know if that crossed any voter's mind in making a selection, but basically what you can say is that the award was given to a film that had momentum, that continuously picked up award after award from critics associations, from film groups, at film festivals all around the world. I think starting at Berlinale film at this film festival in Germany, where it first had a chance to distinguish itself as a movie that people who were serious about cinema had to get out and go see. And then, going forward again, in order to get this into theaters and independent movie theaters or art houses, where they had to adopt a kind of traveling roadshow distribution model And I have the list. I'll get into where the screenings are happening after tonight's award, and I don't know if Basil and Yuval are going to be present. Basil is living under circumstances. You'll hear him speak in his acceptance speech, in which people around him are being expelled every single day. They are under attack by violent settlers every single day, not to mention the fact that overall, the general policy in the Trump administration at this moment is to allow the annexation, allow Israel and its military to annex the West Bank and forcibly displace all of the people in West Bank. And there's talk of like they should just basically self-deport and leave the territory and go to Jordan or Egypt or try to make it somewhere else. But for whatever they try to do, if they stay, there's this feeling that they would just be massacred for trying to stay put. So there's a great risk right now for people who are standing their ground there, like Basil and his family and others that he knows in the villages in Masafir Yatta, who are saying, we belong. This is our land, and you are taking it from us. And that is what this film is so powerfully about. So let me show you the group arriving at the awards ceremony because I've got this here. This was shared. Let me go to this, and then we'll play the acceptance speech, and then I'll wrap this up. So here we have, just make sure you can see that. There they are, keffiyehs, and then the scarves, the Palestinian flag. And this was shared actually by the state of Palestine, of course, not officially recognized, never officially recognized by the United States. And so let's get to the acceptance speech, which I must, just to put into perspective, tell you that there were no boos. You won't hear boos. And it's somewhat striking. I recall Michael Moore getting on stage, maybe you do too, and accepting an award. He protested the Iraq War. He was accepting an Academy Award for Bowling for Columbine. It was 2003. Steve Martin was the host of the Oscars. And everyone in the audience, it would seem, or a really large section of the audience, booed him as he was protesting President George W. Bush and the push for an invasion into Iraq. And so now the audience was much more open. The attendees were much more open to this. And I don't think that says how much ground the Israeli government and this project for completing the settler colonial project. It says like what this war on Gaza did to it and how much support has been lost. Because generally speaking, before the war on Gaza, these illegal settlements would have been a non-story. It wouldn't have really meant much anymore. I think the war on Gaza primed people to accept that this is something that is worthy of our attention, that we should care about what's happening to people like Basil Adra. So let's hear this acceptance speech.
Thank you to the Academy for the award. It's such a big honor for the four of us and everybody supported us for this documentary. About 2 months ago, I became a father, and my hope to my daughter that she will not have to live the same life I'm living now, always fearing settlers' violence, home demolitions, and forest spill displacements that my community, Masafir Yatta, is living and facing every day under the Israeli occupation. No other land reflect the harsh reality that we have been enduring for decades and still persist as we call on the world to take serious actions to stop the injustice and to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people.
We made this film, Palestinians and Israelis, because together our voices are stronger. We see each other. The atrocious destruction of Gaza and its people, which must end. The Israeli hostages brutally taken in the crime of October 7th, which must be freed. When I look at Bassel, I see my brother, but we are unequal. We live in a regime where I am free under civilian law, and Bassel is under military laws that destroy his life and he cannot control. There is a different path, a political solution without ethnic supremacy, with national rights for both of our people. And I have to say, as I am here, the foreign policy in this country is helping to block this path. And, you know, why? Can't you see that we are intertwined? That my people can be truly safe if Bassel's people are truly free and safe. There is another way. It's not too late for life, for the living. There is no other way. Thank you.
So they got up on the stage and they made that speech, and they weren't cut off, and they were able to say really important things to Americans to make it clear that freedom and justice for Palestinians is a way for freedom and justice to exist for Israelis, that both of their futures are intertwined. And to say that, you know, the bond in this movie is very powerful between Basil and Yuval. And I think it's fair to say that early in the project, when you watch this movie and you see Yuval enter the picture, you know, they're just haven't probably known each other for very long, but there is this camaraderie that develops along the way, and a commitment. And it's really great that they were able to win this award, because they set out with this film to break a kind of apathy and disregard for Palestinian lives that exists among the global news media, at least up until the war on Gaza. This project was started in 2019, and it went all the way to October 2023. And then the event happened, the October 7th attack happens, and then you have Israel's response, which becomes this massive act of a genocidal assault on Palestinians in Gaza. And they're sitting here with a project that they're ready to share, and wondering if the world wants to see this story in the West Bank while there is so much carnage happening in the other Palestinian territory. And so they push forward and release the movie and come to recognize that no, like, actually people will respond to this film. And it's really great that they're able to get this award, because in the movie you hear that they are making this because they want a US audience to see it, and they want a US audience to see it so that they will then pressure the government, and they also want people in the US government to see it so that then they will recognize that they need to do something to stop the Israeli government from allowing these illegal settlements to continue, from allowing these settlers to engage in their violence. Now, what has happened since is that those people who were, Yuval and Basil together, I think, would say that what they've seen is hugely disappointing, because with the war on Gaza, it's been confirmed that no matter how many atrocities are live streamed, the U.S. has plenty of officials to ensure that this policy continues, where the Israeli military is fully backed. You know, there are $3 to $4 billion of arms and other military equipment and other forms of aid being sent to this government every 3 or 4 months. There's another package, it would seem. And not only that, you also have that with Donald Trump, you've got somebody who is backed by Miriam Adelson, who favors the wide annexation of West Bank. And I don't know. We also have seen that Donald Trump wants to develop the Gaza Strip into a kind of Las Vegas, with the Riviera Casino or whatever. So with that, I think they'd say that it was even more essential that they be able to step onto that stage in Hollywood and say to billions of people all over from that platform, the same platform that last year had the filmmakers behind Zone of Interest step on stage and speak out against Palestinian genocide, that they were able to, second year in a row, get on, put Palestinians before the essential need for people to speak up and stop these attacks on Palestinians, to stand on the stage and say something so meaningful and powerful on, this is a ABC News network owned by Disney. You speak about all of this in terms of the corporations that control it. And so where can you see this movie? I need to wrap up, but where could you see this? If you go to nootherland.com, there's a page for buying tickets, and you can see what I described before as like the traveling roadshow model. So it's already played and opened in a number of cities. You might have missed it. Just hang tight. It'll probably end up popping up at some point on some streaming service. It might be a smaller kind of niche streaming service. It may be a little bit harder for you to find and buy and view. I don't know if it'll ever be available on Amazon or if you'll get to watch it through like Netflix. Netflix took down all of their Palestinian movies last year. But go ahead, and if you go to nootherland.org, you can see what screenings are upcoming and post the Oscars. Hopefully they are able to get some more screenings, but it opened in Pittsburgh on March 1st, Hamilton, Ontario, Waterloo, Ontario. I think those are in Canada. Boulder, Colorado, Kingston, Washington. You've got Las Vegas, Nevada is going to have it on March 5th. Winthrop, Washington, Eugene, Oregon's booked it. Derby Line, Vermont, Corvallis, Oregon, Louisville, Kentucky, Hamilton, New York, Kansas City, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. And then you see that some of these locations that are showing it are going to be kind of like university screenings. You should be mindful, though, that there are these so-called pro-Israel groups that might try and get the picture canceled. I'm sure there will be some kind of a campaign on the part of the Israeli lobby to further suppress this film in a moment when, again, like the buzz was high for this documentary. It was pretty high for a film. It actually was, even though it didn't have distribution, it was the highest grossing documentary of the nominees, which actually just says that it's there's really poor distribution for documentaries in the United States. But Jupiter, Florida will have it on March 11th. Louisville, Kentucky, there will be a museum screening. Tampa, Florida, Williamstown, Massachusetts, Brattleboro, Vermont, Cary, North Carolina, Westerly, Rhode Island. They're doing the best to get this into theaters around the country so that people can see it. And once it's done, and I don't actually know that the filmmakers are going around to these screenings. This is a substitute for not being able to get into like the AMCs and the Cinemarks that are more popular chains. And so they have to go to these locations. But yeah, that's No Other Land. And I feel really satisfied. I know it doesn't stop what is unfolding. And of course, Basil knows that. He said, and I quoted him in the article that I wrote over at the Dissenter about this. He wrote, "This is the worst period we have ever lived through. it's hard to say anything encouraging because the situation is so terrible. I just saw what Trump did. He canceled the sanctions that had been imposed on some settlers by President Joe Biden's administration. Clearly, he has no compunctions about officially handing the West Bank over to Israel. Neither international law nor moral justice will prevent Israel and the United States from expelling us. And then he said, even if we win an Oscar, I will go back to my cruel reality in the West Bank. So it's a celebration. It's a celebration that a film that takes on a topic that powerful executives have tried to prevent us from seeing, from watching and learning. It's a moment to celebrate that these filmmakers were able to break through this kind of informal cartel. It was a censorship effort on their part, and it failed. I think people noting that it wasn't available anywhere actually became more committed to seeking it out. At least I was. And I didn't have to drive as far as some, perhaps, but I did have to drive 45 minutes to an hour to get to a theater that I could see it in. I had to drive into the city of Chicago to see it. I live on the city limits. So, if it had wider distribution, it would have probably played in one of the more suburban theaters around Chicago. And it would have been a little bit easier. Just throwing that out there as an example of the fact that people around the country have been driving 1 to 2 hours if they really want to see this film. I believe. I think that people who like film, who do this thing where they get on YouTube and talk about movies, are more like to track this. They were looking around like, where can I go to catch this film before the Academy Awards? So I hope that eventually it does secure a deal where it is more accessible. And then we get beyond that. And with that film, it stands as this marker. We all know what's happening now, and everything that happens after it, we are complicit. Everything that happens, this is what our government is doing. Yuval and Basel and Hamdan and Rachel and all, Israelis and Palestinians who are willing to link up together and take action for peace and justice and to end apartheid. What they're really saying to us is that we cannot have peace and justice until the United States stops fueling this oppression over in U.S. and Israel. Basil's a journalist. He was detained. He was taken by the military last year in 2023, and he was put out in the sun for a few hours. This is a form of torture that the Israeli soldiers impose. The movie features this one sequence where they're trying to hunt down Basil and to get to him, and they can't find him. The village is, basically just watching the soldiers go door to door, and Basil is hiding out. There's a great risk to Basil for being a successful filmmaker. Being an award-winning Oscar might actually put a bigger target on him. It doesn't necessarily insulate him. He becomes a voice that is a threat now, an even greater threat to the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu. And obviously, Donald Trump and his administration aren't going to care one bit if something terrible happens to Basil and the people who worked on this film. Even Yuval Abraham shouldn't just think that he's not going to be hauled before somebody in Israel and accused of being disloyal or perhaps doing something that goes against, I guess, Judaism or whatever religious zealotry they could impose against somebody for successfully bringing this before millions upon millions, if not billions of people around the world. So we all consider that, but celebrate the success. I think it's great that this happened, that they were able to garner this recognition. And then more generally, for just those of you who do care about cinema and enjoy watching these movies and what they bring, Sean Baker stepped up on the stage and spoke marvelously about the need for these movies to continue to be released into theaters so people can have this experience. I'm not the person I am today. With I would not be here if I didn't get a chance to go to see films in theaters when I was growing up as a child, and it means a lot. It means a lot to me to say that we need to stop seeing the shutdown of thousands of screens of places where people can access these movies and have this experience. I know that's not like the most pressing injustice. It's not anything close to uh, fending off the extermination of a people, but uh, I value the escape. I value the connection. I value the chance to go sit with a group of people and take in a movie on a Sunday afternoon. And so, yeah, I think it means something that Sean Baker and Honora won. Again, as we wrap up, Sean Baker, Honora, you see The Substance getting recognition. Coralie Vergeau, I'm not probably saying that correctly, but the the creativity behind that project, I loved that movie a lot, and I enjoyed watching this 27-minute documentary that dug into the practical effects and the different uh, makeup and hairstyling and things that were done for it, and to really challenge a culture within Hollywood that is toxic. And then you have Flow, and you have I'm Still Here getting recognized in as a best international feature, and departing from what I think are traditionally safe films. That, there are movies that deal with what are important issues, but those are issues that American audiences are already primed to accept as things that they can dig into, and they can put banners in their social media profile in support. These were voters in the Academy who went outside that little universe. So, anyways, thank you for stopping by to listen to me chat about the Oscars late on a Sunday night. And I'll be back soon with some more. Probably it'll be topics that are more in the realm of the work that I do with journalism, but I occasionally make time to hop on this channel and discuss movies. And if you're around to join in and be engaged with me in that conversation, I look forward to talking with you. So thank you, and you have a good night.